Hey guys, Jared, Transformational Coaching, Action is Transformation. In this video, we're going to get into the 5 key conversations you must have before you get into a serious relationship with another person. Hands down, I can't tell you how many times I've coached clients and even have to have coached myself on this where there was an argument, there was an upset where the relationship either ended or almost ended because they didn't have the serious conversation before the relationship started. Now, it's easy to get caught up in relationships. It's easy to get caught up in that honeymoon stage and not have the important conversations that you need to have in order to build a sustainable and longevitous relationship long term, because it feels great. When you're in the honeymoon stage, it's almost like your partner can't do anything wrong, you can't do anything wrong, but obviously there's a lot of dopamine, a lot of oxytocin. Dopamine's a pleasure chemical. Oxytocin is a trust-building chemical. They both feel really good. They have the same addictive qualities to cocaine. So with all those chemical highs that we're getting in the beginning of the relationship, it's important to slow down and have the important conversations that are really the foundations of a healthy relationship. So we're going to go over 5 key topics and questions that I've but now know that are important to ask before we get into a deep relationship with another human being. So let's get into it. Number 1, growth. Communicate how you would like to grow together. Every single relationship is going to change who we are. And it's important to understand how it is that we want to grow and how it is that we want to develop. Eventually, we get to points, I got to this point in my life about 3 years ago where I realized, wow, there's a responsibility on my end to figure out how I want to grow and what I want the rest of my life to look like. Once we get out of survival phase of life where it's just about getting by and making money and just having the bills be paid, you can ask yourself, how do I want to grow as a human being? How do I want to grow emotionally? How do I want to grow financially? How do I really want to show up in life, and what does it look like? And is the person that I'm spending a lot of time and energy with and on, are they going to want to grow in the same direction? When you get on the same page as your partner and you start to understand the direction that you guys want to go, you'll find that life will get a lot easier because you're both heading in the same direction and you're on the same wavelength. What I see a lot of the times play out in relationships is someone will start growing one way and then someone else will start growing another, and they'll start growing apart even though they're just going on their natural paths of growth, and then they'll get caught up in these control security battles. And if we're getting caught up in control power struggles with our significant other, well, then the relationship's going to die and eventually it will break. And so it's really important to recognize that whenever we start a relationship, we want to slow down and ask ourselves, what's next in this relationship, what's going to allow this relationship to grow in a healthy way for both of us? Because if we don't ask ourselves that question, what will end up happening is naturally we'll grow and our partner will naturally grow, and it might be in opposite directions. And then once we start feeling like we're losing that connection, we might go back and forth, and a power struggle might take place. A perfect example of this, I remember a year and a half ago I coached one couple. The man was really focused on his business. He just wanted it to grow. But then he would come back to the relationship with his girlfriend for that sense of enjoyment, that sense of aliveness, to get refilled. And she was in a place where she was very secure in her career and her job, and so she didn't really feel that need. And so they met and they were trying to do different things at the same time. She wanted just to have a really deep relationship because she could afford it, but he couldn't because he was just starting up his business. And so what ended up happening was she would get upset at him when he didn't give her the time and attention that she wanted, but he couldn't because he was in the business and she felt like the business was taking time and attention away from her. And so they actually started growing apart. And so it's important to recognize how it is that we want to grow with our partner and have this conversation in the beginning of the relationship, because then when we do, what ends up happening is we'll have a more enjoyable time later on. We'll save ourselves a lot of stress and exhaustion. Number 2, goals. What goals do each of you have, and how important for you is it to achieve those goals? What types of goals are they? Are they financial in nature? Are they spiritual? Are they emotional? We all have the ability to choose how we want to develop, and when we understand how we want to develop and which direction we want to develop and go down, we get a clearer picture as to whether our partner can support us along that journey or not. And when we get clear about how our partner can support us along that journey or not, we can quit wasting time. Ultimately, we only have so much time, energy, and resources here in the world, and a lot of us want to accomplish great things and contribute to society. And if you're in a relationship where you guys have separate goals, and those goals are going to get in the way of having a healthy relationship, it's important to know that ahead of time. Sometimes we can get caught up in spaces where we see a partner's goals as a threat to the relationship. I know for me, there's been times where I wanted to make something really, really happen. I was really excited about it, and then my partner didn't support me in it, and I thought to myself, well, what's that really about? Why is she not supporting me? And then when I brought that up, she said, honestly, I'm afraid if you go after that I'm going to lose you. And that was a really moving thing to share, but also I realized that, wow, we probably aren't aligned. Like, I want to go further than she does, and she's not nearly as ambitious. And once I could see that, I accepted that we weren't going to grow in the same direction, and that my goals and her goals were very different and not compatible. So it's important to have the goal-setting conversation as early as possible in the relationship. That way you can support each other and know that the goals aren't going to get in the way of the relationship. Number 3, values. If I had to say what was most important in a relationship, it's understanding each other's values and respecting each other's values. A lot of conflict in relationship comes down from not knowing what our values are and what another person's values are and how compatible they are together. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. I remember one time I was coaching a couple. The husband was all about making money, and the wife didn't share that same desire. And so he was always on the phone, always pitching, always negotiating, talking, trying to build and expand. And she just felt like the business always got in the way of the relationship itself. And so what happened was eventually she got to a point where she was fed up, and he had no idea that she was upset. He was just so focused on the business that he couldn't even give her the time and attention that she really wanted or needed. And so everything eventually blew up. And that happened because they had different values. He valued business. He valued making money. What she valued was deep, authentic connection. This is a typical, honestly, I see this challenge a lot more in couples than I care to share. But what eventually happened was she blew up, and he was like, well, why didn't you tell me this? And then it was this whole issue that she didn't know how to communicate what it is that she really desired. But eventually they worked it out. The key thing to recognize here, though, is that he had a value system that says, I want to make a lot of money at all costs. And she had a value system saying, I want to be loved and nurtured and seen in the relationship, and that's really important to me. And once they got on the same page, then they figured out, oh, okay, I just need to give you more time. The guy eventually slowed down a little bit on the business, which was hard for him because we had to go through some financial insecurities that he had. But then also he came back to her, and they created a deeper connection because now he knew what she wanted, and she was clearly communicating what she wanted. And so the relationship was able to grow and blossom. Now, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes that goes way out. Sometimes it goes the exact opposite direction. But the key thing here is to recognize our values and see if they're actually compatible. Some values are very compatible. Other values are not. And if you're with someone who doesn't share the same values as you, that's going to play into the relationship. There is going to be conflict. Everything comes down to time, attention, needs, and resources. And if we value resources such as wealth, and then we have a partner who values resources such as love and affection, and we're not getting those needs met in the relationship, then we might perceive that partner as being a hindrance to what it is that we value most, which can cause upset and anger. I've seen this too much, frankly. So really, when we understand our values, what's most important to us, and we can share with our partner what's most important to us and make sure that their needs and their values aren't going to become a threat to us attaining what it is that we want, which is what all conflict really comes down to, then we can live a more satisfying relationship with life and with our partners and the people that we care about. Some people value communication, whereas other people might value, just being a support and listening. So it's important to get on the same page about our values and to get on the same page about our partner's values and connect over that. And if you don't know what your values are, then those are some important questions you want to ask yourself. What is it? Where is it that I spend most of my time? What do I enjoy most to do? Where do I see a majority of my actions go? Our actions always speak to our values. And sometimes in relationships, I'll see partners say, well, I really value you, and they'll say it with their words, but they won't say it with their actions. So don't allow your partner's words to be the final say. Allow your partner's actions to be the final say. When we speak, that's one thing, but when we act, that's a whole nother level of showing. I always allow people's patterns to speak for themselves. It's one thing to speak and say you want something. It's another thing to take action over that and take repeated action over getting something it is that you want. That's how I know what your values are. So don't let your partner's words be the final say. Let their actions and their patterns be the final say of what their value systems are, and then make sure that your value systems are compatible. Understanding each other's values allows you to understand how compatible you are, and understanding compatibility will allow you to have a more successful, fulfilling relationship. Number 4, space and availability. I love this. I don't know if you guys know about the 5 love languages, but they did this recent one. They added a 6th love language, which is space, which I think is super fantastic. No codependency. It's all about interdependence. How busy is your life, and how much time are you willing to give to your partner? That's the question that we want to ask here. We initially fall into a relationship because it feels really good. And I've coached individuals who fall really hard and fast, and I've been totally guilty of falling hard and fast for someone, but then got really scared and saw, wow, I really deeply love this person, and this is actually kind of terrifying. I'm way more in love with this person. Oh my gosh, now I'm selling my car and moving across the state for this person. What am I doing? I've been guilty of this more times than once. So it's important to understand what you need in the relationship and how much space and how much available time you're going to give to them. Sometimes people fall in love really quickly and then they get scared and they back out. I've had that show up in my life, and I've been that person as well too. But if we don't know how much time and energy we're really willing to spend on another person and vice versa, then we risk feeling disappointed when they don't show up in the relationship as much as we'd like them to. So it's important for us to come to an agreement about how much time and energy the relationship is going to take. And we might not always know this. Some of this might take experimentation, and that's perfectly okay. As long as we communicate what we need from the relationship and what we expect, and ask for our partner's expectations and what they expect in the relationship, that's where the relationship can become a place of peace, a place of rest. That's what relationships are meant to be. They're meant to be places, spaces that we create to where we can get refilled from being out there in the world. And so it's important to define for each other what it is that we are willing to give towards the relationship, when we need to give and when we also need to have our space. Some individuals might need a lot more space, others might want to be clingy, and so have that conversation up front and be willing to go into that. The quicker you go into that and get on the same page, the quicker you can get into a relationship where things feel good, things feel safe and secure. Finally, number 5, personal fears. This is also, I'd say this is probably the most second important facet of a relationship that we want to be aware of and communicate. Many of the times our fears unconsciously play out in relationships. It's a sad truth, but I've seen so many relationships end because someone has a fear of sharing what it is that they're really thinking, or someone has a fear or a worry or a concern as to how the relationship will function. I can remember one of my exes. I ended the relationship because she was clingy and insecure, And she wouldn't even own up to that clinginess and that insecurity because she was worried that if she owned up to it, that we wouldn't be able to have a relationship and I would leave her. So her own worst fears ended up happening because she didn't own her actual fears. And that's usually what happens when we don't own our fears of what we think is going to happen or what we're worried about happening. Usually we self-sabotage. And that happens in all areas of our lives. At least it has for me and some of the clients up until I worked through those patterns. Recently I coached a husband who admitted that he had a fear of losing his job and not being able to provide for the family. And the wife had a fear of not showing up as a good supportive wife. And it was so interesting. Their relationship was playing out in a really unhealthy way. But when they both admitted to each other that they had these fears, they both felt a sense of compassion. They used to get in arguments all the time because she would come back and want, love and affection like most human beings, all human beings do, but especially I think this is more common for women. And that's a generalization, of course, but he would get home from work and she'd want to spend some time with him, but he'd want to get back to work because he was worried about, providing for the family. And so she felt like the job would get in the way of them having a good relationship. And then she would get upset, and then she would question whether she was a good enough wife. And so their personal fears would play out on each other, and they would project those onto each other. And it was so cool to see them come to a space in their relationship where once they started communicating how they were really feeling and their personal fears, they had so much sympathy and empathy for one another. And they finally said, wow, I care for you. You care for me. I didn't even know that. And their connection increased. They deepened their connection because they admitted to each other their personal fears. So sharing our fears and our concerns and worries can actually bring us to a place where we feel a deeper sense of connection with the person that we're with. Every relationship simply comes down to having your needs met. And a lot of the times we fear not having our needs met, or not being able to meet our needs, or not being able to meet our significant other's needs. But once we communicate those, we get on the same page, we get on the same board, and we actually deepen the connection. And that's a beautiful place to be, because then you can relax more into the relationship and enjoy it. And there will be less chaos and fighting. That's all I got for this time. Thanks so much for joining me, you guys. Please, if you found this useful, please share with any friends or family. Also, feel free to subscribe. I'd love for this work to go out into the world. I think if we all knew these things, I know if I knew these things growing up, I would have saved myself a lot of pain and trouble, and that's why I do exactly what I do. If you have any questions or comments or thoughts, please, I'd love to hear them below. I will respond to them as soon as I get to them. I'm very good about responding. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out and connect. I love doing this work, and I really value everyone who watches these videos and gets a lot out of them. That's all I have for this time, you guys. Thanks so much for joining me. If you want to check out live coaching, feel free to check that. That's in the YouTube description box below. If you're watching this on Instagram, it's above in the bio. Laura and I, we coach individuals every Tuesday and Thursday. Right now, we're also running a Sacred Relationship series where we're interviewing relationship coaches, people within the industry, and really getting some of the best advice on how relationships should function. If you'd like to sign up for that, the description it's either below or above. That's all I have for this time. Thanks so much for joining me, you guys. Have a wonderful week. I'll see you soon.